look. Okay, apologies for missing my own introduction, but this is Deborah Bronnet. I'm the British ambassador to the Russian Federation. Look, it's great to welcome you all today and to open the conference on capital markets hosted by the London Stock Exchange Group, and of course supported by the team here, the Department for International Trade team here at the British Embassy in Moscow. And I think I should start by just acknowledging that we have been living through a really quite extraordinary time, and I hope that all of you and your families and colleagues remain well during this time of a pandemic. Of course, just as we diplomats, businesses across all sectors, including financial, professional, legal services, we've all had to adjust, working in a completely different environment, and grapple both at personal and professional levels with the whole range of challenges posed by the coronavirus pandemic. And of course, for many of us in many parts of the world, that is absolutely real and continuing. It's not just been about the pandemic, of course, and if you add to this the legal and political implications of a whole series of economic, political and environmental events, as well, of course, as the UK's departure from the European Union, I think that all underlines just what a demanding year it's been. And of course, very relevant for us here in Russia, as well as in the UK, but the difficult relationship that Russia has, the difficult political relationship, I should say, that Russia has with the West, including with the UK, is adding another layer of complexity. Despite all these challenges, the UK and the UK government continues to encourage and support international trade and business links, including with Russia. Russia is our 22nd largest and therefore an important trading partner. And it's a trading partner where we think there is certainly potential to further improve links, and where we would like to further improve links. The UK, with unrivaled access to global markets, we are the most open and connected financial centre. We handle more foreign exchange than the next 4 largest centres combined, and London, of course, is the world's most international financial centre, providing unparalleled access to global markets, and is a petri dish for innovative financial products and services. And while we can't and shouldn't take this position for granted, we know that we need to work increasingly hard to maintain our advantage and continue to provide the kind of services and access that the world needs. The London Stock Exchange is one of the world's oldest and can trace its history back now, I think, more than 300 years. A bit more recently, since 2017, the majority of the largest listings on the LSE have been international issuers, including 5 of the top 10 in 2020. And last year, 52% of new issue proceeds raised on the LSE were for international companies. And I think we think that's a really positive thing. The LSE is the largest listing and trading venue for Russian securities outside of Moscow, and with most IPOs placed by industrial companies. And I know that LSE Group is now looking to expand its portfolio to other sectors and to attract more technology companies, as the LSE tech listings have gone up from 5 to 30%. The most recent 1.8 billion fixed price IPO is a really great example of an international company success at the London Stock Exchange. And this IPO has hit the record as the largest ever IPO by a Russian retailer on any stock exchange, and the largest international IPO on the London Stock Exchange since 2007. So I think that's something that we're all delighted about. And this example is encouraging and hopefully will pave the way for more Russian IPOs via London's capital markets. I know that later on you'll have a chance to hear directly from the fixed price Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Anton Makhnev, about their IPO experience and why London worked for them. As with every economic sector, we need to look at how we can speed up the transition to a low carbon, sustainable economy, and the UK, alongside Italy, is going to host COP26, the next big international climate conference in Glasgow in November this year. It was postponed from last year due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And that's a really important moment for the world to come together to tackle dangerous climate change. And of course, technologies and services that support and enable clean energy and environmentally friendly products will become increasingly important as we strive for sustainable and inclusive economic growth. Funding this transition will involve a huge expansion in the availability of green finance. And this will be one of the key campaigns in the lead up to COP26. Here at the British Embassy, we're planning to address this important issue, this important topic, with a really busy programme of actions to support this work. And I know that green finance has become one of the priorities for the London Stock Exchange as well. And that's certainly something that we fully support. The UK ranks 8th in the globally for ease of doing business, according to the World Bank. And many companies from different countries, including Russia, choose not only to benefit from the UK's position as a financial centre, but also to locate their international offices in the UK. And if any of you are considering expanding your business internationally, the UK is an ideal choice for you, if you'll forgive the advert, but I am the British ambassador, but it's a really ideal choice for you due to our location, talent, and supporting professional and financial services. And of course, you'll find many of your compatriots are already there as well. And of course, the team here, the Department for International Trade team here, will be really happy to support your company in setting up in the United Kingdom. So I hope you have get some really useful insights into the London Stock Exchange and related services offered today. Enjoy the presentations, and please stay safe, everyone. Берегите себя. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, the Ambassador, for opening of the session, for your valuable contribution to the conference. And now I'm happy to present all the speakers that we have. But before that, just a short note in the Russian language for those who would like to listen to the Russian interpretation of the session. Для того, чтобы конференцию прослушать на русском языке, необходимо скачать приложение Speakers и ввести номер 740050. And now we are waiting for Iona to join us. Probably we can I'm happy to introduce all the panelists of the session today. First of all, we have, that will be Natasha Sanders, Managing Partner, Morgan Stanley, Emily Dillon, Associate Partner from Hudson Sandler, Pavel Zaya, Partner from Shearman Sterling, Neil Shah, Senior Management, London Stock Exchange, Alina Suchova, Managing Director of Sova Capital, Dmitry Brodsky from Renaissance Capital, and we will also probably continue our discussion with Anton Makhnev, Financial Director of Fixed Price. Anton, would you mind to continue and to share your experience in terms of IPO London Stock Exchange, please?
Sure. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to meeting you all at this presentation, and I would like to say that to start with by saying that we as a company are extremely grateful and thankful for the London Stock Exchange for having us as an issuer and being amongst a number of very reputable Russian and international and UK companies who are listed there. So if I start with a short presentation about how our transaction went, I guess it was saying that Fixed Price was founded about 14 years ago with a vision that at some point it will become a public company. And therefore, IPO has always been one of the strategic goals for us. Therefore, when it was not a question whether or not to do an IPO really for us, it was in fact, we together with our advisors and the banks who worked on the transaction together looked at the potential, at the best IPO windows. And as we had all the elements in place prior to the process, then we were able to launch the transaction and focus 100% on efficient execution. So I see that Ayona joined. How do you want to run this? Is it going to be, do you want to do it as a Q&A, or shall I just continue with the presentation? I think Q&A.
Anton, thank you very much. I really apologize to all of you. I've had a horrible crash of all systems for 10 minutes, and thank you very much, Deborah, for starting this conference, and to Al and Ludmila for picking up the questions. I just want to say it's really fantastic to have you all here. It's really amazing to see so many people joining. Anton, your IPO Fixed Price has been, you know, what we call blockbuster this year, and the first IPO from Russia. I think in a while in London, but definitely from the retail sector, the biggest one. So from my perspective, I just wanted to do it actually as a fire chat side. So just give you a number of questions, and I think focusing on some of the maybe you know, for you sharing the know-how. I guess a lot of the questions that we receive from companies, especially Russian companies, is, you know, how difficult is it? And what kind of feedback are you receiving from investors? So from that perspective, I wanted to maybe, you've given us a little bit of color on how it all started, but I wanted to ask you, what are some of the areas that you would like to advise companies to focus on when they're preparing for an IPO?
Yeah, look, absolutely. Let's start with that. So a number of things which I would suggest companies and the shareholders who are considering to do an IPO think about before they start the process. Well, first of all, it's always helpful to have someone inside your organization who knows the IPO process inside out. IPO process in general is not a rocket science, but there are many nuances, and it's worth having someone within your organization who could navigate your firm through all those peculiarities and nuances. It just will make everyone's life easier, and it would ultimately allow you to stay on track with your timetable and they achieve things that you ultimately want to achieve. That's probably one thing. Another thing which I think is important is making sure that you build good communication with both the investor community and also media, because your perception as a company is ultimately very important when you will formally launch the IPO process. So with regards to investor interaction, it's worth having the starting talking to investors sooner rather than later, and not wait, as I said before, the pilot fishing, pre-marketing, or the formal IPO process. You need to build this relationship with them, because this relationship ultimately helps them to be more convinced that it's worth investing into your company when you formally launch the IPO. On the other hand, it's also worth having proper interaction with media. And for example, what we've done, we hired a PR firm from the very beginning, and we developed with them a detailed PR plan of how we will be targeting international and Russian well-reputable business newspapers like Bloomberg, Financial Times, Vedomosti in Russia, in order to raise awareness about our company. We did that because our business model is quite unique within the Russian context, but it's not, it's quite common in the developed markets, in Western Europe, in North America. And in those media articles, we were able to draw those parallels, and investors who read those articles were able to relate us to the best-in-class peers globally. And it also resulted in a number of reverse inquiries from investors back to the investment banks and to us, which also helped our process. And last but not least, it's very important to have things like legal structure and financial reporting in place and very solid before you start your IPO process. I mean, I appreciate for the most people on this call, financial reporting is a quite boring thing, which we just do on a monthly, quarterly, or annual basis, and it's not something which is a particularly exciting exercise. But the truth is, unless you have your audited or reviewed financial accounts done, you cannot launch a transaction. As simple as that. So you need to make sure that and the sooner you launch the sooner you're able to launch a transaction, the more kind of optionality you have with when you target a specific market window. So market window is a term that bankers typically use to define a period of time when the market is receptive to buy shares of a new issue. But the truth is that for Russian companies, we don't have a benefit of a full IPO market window. We typically have a benefit of an IPO fortechka. And those of you who are Russian speakers will know what a fortechka means. For those who are not Russian speakers, I'll explain. So fortechka is a kind of small fan-like window of a bigger window, which is opened from time to time in order to get some fresh air into the room or get a transaction done. So the sooner you get and those fortechkas are being opened for a short period of time. And if you have your financials in place and all other elements in place, then you are able to get through it. And that's what we did. We were able to complete our annual audited financial accounts in just 5 weeks after the end of the financial year. And we therefore were able to quite significantly capitalize on a quite receptive market conditions which existed in the first 2 months in the year of 2021 and also in the beginning of March. If we had done our transaction 2 weeks later, I'm pretty sure the outcome would have been quite different.
Thank you, Anton. And just to summarize, early engagement with investors, focusing on media engagement, communication, appointing someone in the senior leadership who has had experience of taking company public.
Deal captain within your organization.
Exactly, team captain. Financial, all of the proper financial reporting in place. What about corporate governance? Have you thought about independent directors, independent chairman, this structure at all?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, in general, ESG topic is becoming more and more important every year. And corporate governance is just one aspect of a more broad ESG initiatives that all companies and also those who are just considering to do a public offering should be definitely considering. So corporate governance is, as I said, an important part of the ESG in general, and that's what we also looked at very carefully, and we created a new board of directors where there was a very healthy mix between founding shareholders, the management team, and independent non-executive directors with reputable background, who are also very experienced people, which gave investors conviction about solid corporate governance practice for the public fixed price.
And during your marketing roadshow and the pilot fishing, have you had some specific feedback from investors, specific questions that actually helped you adjust your equity story? Because there were consistently same questions that were being asked.
Yes, it's not during pilot fishing. It's, as I said, we started the process of investor interaction several years before we formally launched the IPO. So we were able to get this feedback over a number of years and take it into account whilst we were developing and framing our equity story. We were also able to provide investors with answers to their questions and give them sufficient period of time to digest this information. And it is very important nowadays when after COVID, the IPO marketing process has been compressed from 4 weeks to less than 2 weeks. And 2 weeks of marketing is simply not enough for investors to fully digest everything, read the prospectus, go through your presentation and understand your equity story. You need to start educating them well ahead of your formal launch. And that's what you do through pilot fishing. And that's what we've done like years ago.
No, definitely. And I have one more question, but I think I have some questions coming through from the audience. Thank you. Keep them coming. You have a special chat box window on your screen where you can submit your questions. These are pre-moderated, but I'm sure our audience won't need will exercise self-restraint. So Ilya is asking you, what is the point of focusing on a single time window if you plan to be a public company for years to come? What difference does selecting this IPO window make?
As I said, in Russia, we don't have windows, we have fortochkas. So there is a good example, like back from 2014, when Lenta, and by the way, they also have done very good, very fast financials. And they completed their 1 billion IPO just before the Crimea situation, as everyone will recall, in February, March 2014. And after that, there were no IPOs for 3 years out of Russia whatsoever. So it's not like, unfortunately, we live in a situation when there is lots of political noise, sanctions, and all that's the new reality that we face. And it's not like, okay, we missed a window this quarter, there will be another great window next quarter, or maybe 2 quarters after. There may be no windows for 2, 3, or 4 years. I mean, who knows how the future will develop. I can say that there was an attempt to do a transaction in 2014, then in 2018, then in 2020, just before COVID. And that's actually our, in reality, 4th attempt that we were able to get through this window.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and I would definitely agree with that. And I remember, the discussions around Lenta, how they literally jumped on the last step of the leaving train. You know, it was one that really got through just before the European sanctions, and I think it took the investor, international investors, to adjust to the reality of those sanctions. It took them a couple of years, and then we started seeing international IPOs out of Russia, and indeed domestic, actually, again coming through, which is I think fantastic. I think we have a question from Katya Gorbatyuk. What was your process of recruiting independent non-executive directors?
It's quite standard, actually. I'm very grateful to the investment banks who worked on the transaction, because they came up with a long list of potential candidates. And then we sat down with the founding shareholders and with the management, with our CEO, and went through this list one after another, and then identified a number of a short list of candidates who then we approached, and at the end it resulted in having 3 very solid independent non-executive directors as participants on our board.
Yeah. And I guess we have a few minutes left, and I think what's really important to me as a representative of London Stock Exchange is to actually show the perspective of a publicly listed company. From my perspective, and from I think everyone on this panel will agree, that the IPO is actually the start of the journey rather than the end of the of a project. So what has changed for you as the CFO of a publicly listed company? What are your priorities going forward?
As for CFO of any public company, it's now very important to manage a new group of stakeholders who are public investors, and therefore it's taking a quite fair share of my time nowadays of speaking to investors, especially large investors who are at the top of our shareholder registers, and keeping them updated on what's going with the company, with the industry, and the overall market environment. But other than that, operationally, I would say that nothing has changed, and Fixed Price has always been very efficient with its operations as the team grew from a good hard discounter. So we just getting our stuff done in the same way how we were doing it in the past.
Oh, that's really good to hear. I think that's I think one of the things that we want to ensure is that the management and the leadership of companies, of public listed companies, have this mentality that they behaved in the best possible way and focused on the right things before going public, and they will continue doing it once they've already listed. So there is not like you were a company
Absolutely.
A before that and then became completely different afterwards. I think that's really important. And from your perspective, I just wanted to ask as well, being a Russian company, did you feel like you were treated differently? How did you find the regulatory process or approval process, without going into too much detail, but did you feel like you were just you were able to demonstrate that you were a good quality company without explaining why a Russian company is seeking to go public?
It ultimately is a function of what's the quality of business you have. As long as the business of a very high quality and comparable or exceeds on a number of metrics the international peers, the best-in-class peers, then investors are just looking through the fact that it's a Russian company and are valuing the company on its own merits, comparing to the global comps. And that's exactly what we were able to achieve. And if you look at the multiples at which we raised $1.8 billion at our London IPO, then it's comparable to where global international peers are trading. So the thing has Russian discount, which exists from time to time, it wasn't really applicable to us.
And I think that's exactly what we want to hear. You know, if you're high quality company, when you are the best in class compared to international peers, then there is no reason why you can't go public. And this is a very good volume. Yes. Well, yes.
Ayuna, if that's okay, may I ask Anton one more question, if that's all right. Good afternoon, everyone, by the way. I'm Pavel Shaya. So Anton, of course, it's 2021. It's the world of the pandemic. Just in terms of pure execution of your meetings, and you put a lot of focus on your early look meetings, how did, presumably most of those meetings happened online these days. How did you find that way of interacting with investors through early look, pilot fishing, presumably analyst presentation, roadshow, all of this happens in the virtual world. Did you see any difference compared to your previous attempts, or do you say that it's business as usual and investors are just familiar with how the technology works?
Surprisingly, despite not having personal interaction, everyone seems to love virtual meetings, because it just makes things much more efficient, and you can compress, instead of 5 to 6 meetings when you have to travel from one location to another, take an overnight flight, fly somewhere, check into the hotel, etc. All this, logistical nightmares and headaches. You have to have 8 to 9 or maybe even 10 meetings within a day. And it allows you, as I said, to compress your marketing process from 4 weeks into 2 weeks. And the whole thing was 100% virtual for us. So starting from the kickoff meeting with the banks up till the pricing meeting, it was 100% all virtual. Drafting sessions, analyst presentation, early look meetings, pilot fishing, like everything, roadshow presentation. And it's actually pretty efficient. I can't say I don't miss personal interaction. It's a very important thing, building your relationship with investors. But process-wise, it actually works very well.
Yeah. So what
I see a question. What about final party? We're still waiting for the markets to reopen, to have one physically.
Yeah, but we did the market open ceremony with you, right? So that was the best we could do in the virtual environment, and hopefully we can also invite you later in the year.
Fingers crossed.
To the London Stock Exchange to celebrate properly.
Fingers crossed.
Okay. Well, fantastic. Thank you, Pavel, for your questions too. Yelena, definitely there will be a party probably in Moscow and in London at some point. And with that, Anton, if you stay with us, if you're able, and I will switch to the, you're probably not able actually, Anton. I remember you have a time constraint, so feel free to leave. But anyway, thank you so much. Your participation has been super valuable for us and for the audience. So with that, I'd like to move on to our next panel. It's the panel of our distinguished experts on capital markets outlook. And the experts on our panel cover the whole range, all of the aspects of the IPO process. You have ECM origination bankers, you have law firms. So Pavel, who is focusing on both ECM and DCM. We have Emily from Hudson Sandler focusing on the communication and media part. We have a representative from the London Stock Exchange focusing specifically on the technology sector, Neil Shah. So Dmitry Brodsky from Renaissance Capital, Alina Suchova from Sova Capital, Emily Dillon again from Hudson Sandler, Pavel Zhayev from Shearman Sterling. And I think we are also waiting for Natasha Sanders. I am not sure if she has been able to join, but I think we'll kick off in the interest of time. And if Natasha joins during that period, we'll loop her right in. So I think from my perspective, what's interesting is this unique year that we're experiencing right after the horrors of the 2020, the pandemic, during which some deals happened, and of course we saw, Russia's Ozone listing in the US. We saw Kaspi, fintech company from Kazakhstan, listing in London. We saw a handful of really good listings in the UK, but also international. But I think the start of this year has been unprecedented in terms of the volume and quality of listings coming through, actually globally, but also through the London Stock Exchange. So I wanted, in that context, to talk to this panel a little bit about what we will be looking for the rest of the year, specifically in the context of Russian companies. So maybe I'll start with Dmitry and Alina. We have seen, the IPO fixed price. How positive are you about more Russian companies listing both in London and internationally?
Hi.
Maybe Dmitry, we'll start with you. Yeah.
Thank you, Alina. Hi, everyone. It's very nice being here. Thanks for hosting us. So I think on our side, we do see a lot of momentum in the market, in the activity right now, and that's very encouraging. I mean, as you mentioned, Ozon broke the ice last year, and every Russian company realized that the markets are actually open. People didn't have that understanding or impression end of last year, and since then, a lot of corporates started getting ready, or at least started discussing accessing the public markets. So right now, we have seen several more IPOs getting done. One of the notable was Sigeja IPO earlier this year. We saw several secondary market transactions getting done, and again, regardless of the listing venue, some of them, London, obviously, they were well received, and we see a lot of very significant IPO pipeline. Obviously, we're speaking of the tech sector being the kind of the champion that's been the most sought after by investors. But overall, I think there are a lot of growth stories in Russia, and that's what investors are looking for. Fixed price is a great growth story that's kind of why it got that attention that it deserved, and we're seeing, and also other sectors, we're seeing a lot of growth stories.
Alina?
I would actually want to say that 2020 wasn't actually a disastrous year. It was actually quite a good year for the ECM transactions out of Russia. We actually had about 20 deals, which, given the year that we were facing, I think, from the ECM perspective, showed that the markets do remain open. Obviously, there were periods on when those windows were open during 2020. Either those were deals that completed right before the pandemic started, full scale in March, and then we had the markets rebouncing back in fall. Yes, most of the transactions, raising approximately $8 billion all in total, happened in the fall. So I think we, as a market, followed pretty much the broader universe, where 2020 was the year of either equity recap, jumbo monetization. Actually, most of the Russian deals that were happening were secondary transactions. They were monetizations. They were all secondary sell downs. And opportunistic trades. Companies like, Ozon and fixed price this time in Sigeja. So I think if your business can sustain the turbulence in the market, if your business model can prove that you can, navigate through those, as Dmitry said, the quality of those companies will be very welcomed by the investors. And I think we're seeing this right now, and I think, with fixed price and Sigeja opening up the markets, because the Russians always want somebody else to pave the road first before making any steps. Unfortunately, part of national psychology. So I'm very grateful to fixed price and to Sigeja for paving the way. And we do indeed see deals happening. I mean, over the last 2 days, we had about 3 follow-on offerings right after the May holidays. And I'm hoping to see some more, probably in the June window. And definitely, if we're not going to see any, regulatory or, market conditions deterioration by fall, I think we're going to see quite a few instances being put up at that time. Because, as we said, market conditions can distort and wreck your deal very easily. I mean, bond yields go up, then you can see, growth stocks and the pandemic winners suffer immediately. I mean, that's what we're experiencing in the States right now. I mean, look at the tech rout that is happening over there, all driven by the bond yield. And when you have a deal in the making for 2, 3, 4 months, going to the back of somebody asked the question, how you can focus on a window. You have to focus on a window because you can never know how the market will turn.
No, I agree with you, Alina. And look, I think the window that we've had so far has been pretty big. And, the sheer number of companies who have actually pushed their schedules forward and actually compressed their marketing into, and just came to the market sooner. I think it's been quite healthy. So I think the markets have been really buoyant so far. And just to give some numbers, so we've had over 32 now IPOs so far this year. Overall companies have raised over 20 billion actually sterling on our market through primary capital. So it's been super healthy. And with that, I just want to turn to Neil. Neil, I just saw you recently published on LinkedIn that 16 out of those 31 or 32 IPOs have been from the technology sector. Clearly, there is one area where we're seeing an amazing amount of activity through the London Stock Exchange. And just to give some name, Darktrace, AlphaWave, Trustpilot, the Danish tech IPO, etc., etc. So could you give us a bit more color on why you think this is happening, as when it is happening, and what are some of the main factors that are influencing this flow of technology listings?
Certainly, Ayuna, and thanks very much for having me, everyone. I think going into the pandemic, everyone was, afraid of what was going to happen. I was listening to a podcast yesterday with a well-known VC from Insight, Devon Perek, and he was saying that, going to COVID, they were going back to the LPs and ready to hang up their boots, saying this is going to be an awful year. But looking globally at VC deals, PE deals, IPOs, every exchange seems to be busy, and that's certainly true for London Stock Exchange. We had 8 tech and tech-enabled IPOs last year, 16 in the year to date, and looking at the pipeline for the rest of the year, it looks just as strong. And I think this has really been a long time in the making. So speaking to many founders, they talk about digital transformation being shrunk from 5-year projects to a few months. I'm sure many of you have been ordering more online throughout the pandemic, and that's certainly helped the e-commerce sector. And we're expecting to see several e-commerce IPOs in the next month or so, which is really testament to this theme. But what we've been seeing is companies typically staying private for longer, and the IPO environment, especially in the UK, not historically lending the right valuations to some of these companies. So founders were selling their businesses more than they were thinking about IPO. But I think that's really flipped around. And if you look today, especially in some subsectors like the gaming subsector, public company valuations are miles apart from what you can achieve in the private domain. And I think that's really helping the steady flow of companies coming to market. We've always had those founder-managed businesses coming through, but it's great to see companies like Trustpilot, a unicorn from Denmark, backed by top-tier VCs, Darktrace, which is a British company, and also North American businesses like AlphaWave, one of the largest semiconductor IPOs in history. Could have easily gone to NASDAQ and came to London because I think you get a level of relevance in London that you just can't achieve elsewhere. You don't need to be a decacorn, let alone a centacorn, to go public on our markets. Our largest company is Ocado, $20 billion of market cap. The largest private company is Ocado, 40 billion. And so, if you are a Caspi, you come here and be in that top 20 and really stand out from the crowd.
And you mentioned Caspi, and I mean, it's not a Russian, it's Kazakh story. It's still the CIS, but I'm so encouraged by its market value today, 15 billion market value, compared to 6.5 billion valuation when they came to the market last November. So that's hugely encouraging. It's a really amazing fintech story. Thank you, Neil. And I'll come back to you on a couple of other points as well. But maybe with that, move on to Pavel. Pavel, you are an experienced partner, a legal practitioner working with ECM and DCM. What are some of the trends that you're seeing from the legal perspective? What are some of the deals that are being done in the region? And what do you think? Do you think that the market will stay strong until the end of the year?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone, again. So when I look at the legal and maybe even the regulatory environment, what I like to think is that the regulatory response is always the best response when it reacts properly and appropriately to the market. And in particular, when I look at the UK regulatory environment these days, there is a lot going on, and I think we're expecting more changes, right? Of course, the elephant in the room, just for the benefit of everyone, is the Lord Hill review. This is a major step in the UK to actually strengthen London as the financial hub, as the IPO center going forward. This translates, in my view, into more interest from many companies from outside of the UK, including Russia, CIS. Those companies will be coming to the UK. There will be quite a few changes, which will now mirror to some extent the US model. We will have the ability to have a dual share class structure, which currently is not possible. The free float requirement will be lowered. Many of those changes are aimed directly at tech companies, and I think this is a very positive change. Of course, Ayuna will know that very well. Even the standard segment of the London Stock Exchange will be renamed. There will be index eligibility on the main market. So all of those changes are very welcome. I think all of those will encourage more companies to be actually interested in London. Maybe two more things from me. It's 2021. So I think the magic word this year and last year is SPAC and de-SPAC. We should also probably briefly talk about those. From the UK perspective, again, the Lord Hill review makes clear that the London Stock Exchange listing rules will be amended to facilitate SPAC listings, and that is also a very welcome change and development. Of course, the key issue right now is the suspension of trading upon the business combination, and also how the shareholders vote and the redemption rights, all of which works in the US. So the UK model will be aligned closely with the US model. I personally think it will result in a boom. Of course, of SPACs, we'll see how the US situation develops, because right now there are some, let's call it, issues in the US. But I expect the European, the UK SPAC model to develop. Of course, though, this will be also an attractive opportunity and venue for Russian companies, CIS companies, to come to the London market. And lastly, maybe just on the bond side, 2 points. I think it is a very interesting period of time. We have, of course, the ECM wave, the all record highs of the stock exchange, but at the same time, we have an issue with inflation. I think we are all aware of that. This is coming, so we need to address. Alina also mentioned the yields in the US, how it translates into the tech valuations. I think this is a very interesting development. Right now, the DCM market remains super strong. In my personal experience, most issuers, big size issuers, will come to the London main market, and I expect this trend to continue. Nothing will change. I think we'll talk in a little while about ESG, but the DCM for me is very closely linked to ESG, right? So it's the London Stock Exchange is the dedicated market which the London Stock Exchange has for green bonds. So all of this will result in more interest in coming to the UK.
Thank you, Pavel. And you touched as well on I think you highlighted the two major trends right now. So one is, of course, the Lord Hill listings review that I think everyone's talking about, where lower free float requirements and things like renaming the segments. I agree with you. Personally, as someone who has, I'm head of Europe, so I work a lot with European companies. and the standard segment of the main market, it's actually referred to as standard European, so it's in line with the EU prospectus directive. However, in the context of standard and premium, somehow it sounds as if premium is better. It's not better, it's just different, right? So,
exactly.
so I think it makes sense to rename that. And I think the FCA has recently actually published its intention to run a consultation on SPACs as well. So changing the rules around SPACs, so that will, bring more flow of SPACs into the UK market. And again, let's see where the trends are. I mean, a few weeks ago, SPACs was everything that anyone was talking about. I mean, this time sometimes it's hit and miss. So we'll see where it gets us. Thank you very much. So I'll turn to Emily now. So Anton actually has been talking about, a very important aspect of any IPO is that's the communication and media engagement bit. And although there was a different firm that did the fixed price IPO, EM, shout out to EM, they did a fantastic job. Emily, I wanted to ask you, what is your perspective from your approach at Hudson Sandler and how you bring companies to market?
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for having me on. It's really great to be on with all these interesting people and talking to our audience today. So I work with Hudson Sandler. We've been working with Russian clients for about 15 years, both listed and unlisted businesses. And we've obviously, during that time, we've advised on several IPOs. It was really great to hear the case study from Anton, actually, just to highlight the importance of communication strategy in a successful transaction, not only in the success of getting the right valuation and in attracting investors to the transaction itself, but also in the aftermarket supporting the valuation and also sustaining the company's sort of social license to operate for international stakeholders as well. So that's really important. And actually, I would echo what he was saying about bringing in your advisors early. It's from our perspective, we really like to start working with a company months before the transaction is announced, so that we can make sure that all the groundwork is ready to ensure it's successful. I think the key things to remember are the IPO communication strategy. It's not only to promote the investment case, but it's also to manage the risks. And usually what we would do is come in and do a proper audit of companies' reputations to make sure there isn't anything that's going to be unearthed by curious media around the time of the transaction that could be damaging to the deal. I think we've been working with Russian companies for many years, and unfortunately, the international media still love an oligarch story. So if you're one of those companies that happens to have some major shareholders existing who have public profiles, it's really important to have a look as well at those and see how one can mitigate potential risks that might come out of that during that time of intense scrutiny around the transaction. So I think in terms of messaging, positive messaging around the investment case, one of the first things we say to our clients is you consider your company like your baby, or your company is your baby. And often company owners want to tell investors and media everything they know about them because they're so excited. And from our perspective, we need to come in and tell them how to distill that investment case into 3 key messages. What's the strategy, what are the markets, and how are you going to execute? So once that messaging is in place, we also like to start media education early for the same reasons that Anton mentioned, actually. It's really important that when the transaction actually hits, that the key media who are likely to comment on that transaction already have a really good understanding of the business, its markets, and its prospects. Because the worst case scenario is that there are inaccuracies in the reporting at the time when investors are looking to invest. Or you can even get biased assumptions from ill-educated journalists that could be damaging to the reputation. So that's really important. And usually what we do actually is we do a sort of selective, very discreet media engagement program well ahead of the transaction being announced with key journalists. And our aim would be to get 1 or 2 good profile articles about that company, explaining the strengths of the business and why it's relevant, because those are the kind of pieces in tier 1 media that are going to influence media coverage at the time of the transaction and inform smaller publications at that time. So those are two main things. Can I just touch on one more thing very briefly, Ayuna?
Yes.
And that's ESG, which I know is a big buzzword and everyone's already mentioned. But actually your ESG communications are also important, and there is quite a lot of work that tends to have to go into that for a private company ahead of a transaction. Obviously, it's important to get to a broader range of investors. And Hudson Sandler, in the last couple of years, we've actually developed a specific offering, HS Sustain, which is aimed at helping companies develop their ESG and sustainability strategies. And we tend to help both pre-IPO and listed companies in developing those strategies, but also securing ESG ratings. And also thinking about how is your business purpose relevant to a sustainable future, because investors are increasingly looking for that as well. And if you want access to the most possible capital, you already need to be thinking about that. So I think there is a lot to think about from a communications perspective. And I think what everybody on this call would probably agree is that the thing to do is get your advisors in early. They've done it before. They've got lots of experience, and they can take you through the process. And yeah, the IPO is probably the most high-profile event, the most scrutinized event in a public company's life. So if you get negative media coverage online around that time, that's going to stick around, and that's going to affect the ongoing valuation.
Well, I think, Emily, I absolutely agree with that. And you know, managing the engagement early, and also focusing on the strengths, and focusing also on other things such as ESG, I think is hugely important. And ESG, you know, focusing on ESG from the perspective of environmental friendliness, sustainability, corporate governance, actually enfranchises not just investors, but actually all of the stakeholders, including employees and customers and commercial partners, and so on. So that's I think really crucial. Dmitry, you mentioned in one of our conversations that you are expecting 30 Russian companies to list this year. Do you stand by that statistic? And but I also want to ask you, what are some of the trends from the from the sector perspective? So, which sectors you think in Russia at the moment most promising for listings?
Yeah, Yuna, thanks for bringing this up. Yeah, we do see a lot of Russian companies assessing public capital markets, IPOs, specific IPOs, and I think we have more than 30 on our list that we having these conversations with, and that's, I'm pretty sure, it's not unique in the space. I mean, not all of them will make it, and that's a lot of this discussion, and some of them will just looking at this and considering whether the public market is suitable, because IPO by itself is not it should serve a certain goal, right? It's not a target by itself, so it should be achieving the right goals by the shareholders and for the shareholders and the company. But we do expect to see, I don't know, several this year, and some of them will come later in 2022 and later. In terms of industries, I think, as I said, the most appealing to investors are the growth stories, and that's what they are looking in Russia pretty much, actually, regardless of the sector. But by the nature, when we mention that there's a growth, this would be tech, this would be consumer, this would be some healthcare, and this would be inevitably resources. Russia is still a resource-heavy country. At the same time, all of them will be very focused, on what the growth profile they can deliver, and not just, you can't really play. Investors don't really buy just a yield stock, so they need to see the perspective of at least several years out, and how the financials how the company will grow. But that would be the summary from me.
Anything else to add? Maybe from you? Anyone would add maybe? No? That's fine. So Emily touched on ESG. So, Pavel, do you see this trend of companies focusing on ESG in your practice?
Yes, certainly. I think Emily and also Anton touched on ESG. Yeah. I think in Anton's part, I think he touched on the letter G in the ESG acronym, right? ESG is not only G, it's environmental, social, and governance. Of course, governance is super important. I think the other elements are equally super important. Interestingly, when I look back 2-3 years, I think the ESG focus started in the capital markets world, mainly on the DCM side. We have certain industry guidance in terms of what should be published, how we report, what are the KPIs. I think this is a well-trodden path by now. More recently, we see an increased focus on ESG in the context of equity, capital markets, and IPOs specifically. That is a very interesting trend, at least in my view. Recently, I've seen a separate ESG third-party report prepared specifically for an issuer in connection with the IPO. I think this trend will continue. There's no question about that. I think the investor base, the ESG dedicated investor base commands certain focus. But if I take one step back, I would say, for me, ESG is not only about what we say in the prospectus. ESG is also about changing the culture and the operating structure of the company, right? It is not a one-off exercise. It is how we're going to operate going forward, right? With that focus, which has to go through all levels of the company, and we are seeing that, and I expect everyone will be focused on ESG going forward.
I think so, and also it's really important to know that ESG applies not just to the companies that naturally are in that space, so yes, renewable energy or technology or similar. It actually applies to the so-called brown industries too, and the natural resources, because we do need to understand that we can't leave those companies behind. They need to actually join all of us on this journey and actually be better and do better. And maybe Emily, maybe you have a couple of thoughts on that. I know that you have a few clients that are sort of in the broader mining sector.
Yeah, I mean, we work with a lot of natural resources clients, sort of mining and steel and various. But I think it's interesting. Russia has always naturally been strong on the social side because of the sort of Soviet legacy, and I think that is being recognized. But increasingly, a lot of these major companies are investing in the technology that's taking their environmental programs above and beyond their international peers. And I think that will be a little bit of an edge in the future for Russian companies. We talked about the Russian discount before, which we said, well, maybe that's disappearing. But I think this is also an area where Russian companies can show some real leadership and take advantage potentially.
Yeah. I wanted also to touch on some of the innovative ways of joining market that some of our companies have been utilizing. So turning to you, Neil, PensionBee used the high growth segment to join the main market of the London Stock Exchange. Can you tell us a little bit more about this segment and what it is designed for?
Certainly, Ayuna. So the high growth segment was set up in 2013, really after a lot of consultation with the venture capital community about what we at London Stock Exchange could do to facilitate more listings of companies. And one thing that came up was you need to have a lower free float requirement. So you can join the high growth segment with a free float as low as 10%, providing you've got £30 million of actual value in free float or a market cap of 300 million at that level. And this is a box that PensionBee hit. This is a relatively early stage online pension provider with about £6 million of revenue in the last year. Really backed by the founder, Romy, who's majority shareholder, and State Street, but no institutional capital in their structure. They saw a route to come to market earlier than most companies, and this is exactly what the high growth segment was designed for. And so our job at London Stock Exchange is to facilitate listings. We we look forward to the changes recommended in the Hill Review. But if you want to IPO later on this year, rest assured you don't have to wait for some of those changes. There's lots of things you can do today. And just to pick up on a few points that Val raised on dual class shares, we've got a number of companies on standard. If you think back to Schroders, one of the oldest fund managers in London, they have a second line of stock that the family own, but also S4 Capital, the Hut Group, Deliveroo have all used the standard segment to achieve dual class shares. If you're a very early stage business, perhaps with not that track record, like an AlphaWave founded 4 years ago, they went to standard because there's no need for the business today to have that track record that you need to be on premium. And one thing that I want to also share with the audience is we also have our junior market AIM. Now, it may surprise you that of the 200 or so tech and tech-enabled businesses in London, about 70% of those are listed on AIM. And the reason they're on AIM is twofold. A, it's great for shareholders in that there's many tax breaks that retail investors have access to in the form of business property relief and no requirement to pay stamp duty when they're investing in AIM shares. But also for the companies and the founders, things like the venture capital trust VCT and EIS schemes allow a certain group of shareholders to support earlier stage businesses at IPO. And so we've always supported companies in what may look like a Series B or C round on AIM. And alongside that, we've obviously got our main market, which is better suited to larger companies. But for those that don't meet those free float requirements, I'd really encourage you to think about the high growth segment, which Just Eat used when they came to market, and PensionBee have used. And hopefully many other companies will see this as a route, especially where they are high growth and they meet that other requirement to have a 3-year CAGR, revenue CAGR of 20%.
Thank you, Neil. Alina, what is the type of the businesses that you are working with at the moment? Do you think there will be on the larger side, or the sort of the SMEs or the high growth future unicorns that maybe at the moment are more suitable for AIM or high growth segment?
Actually, we have quite a healthy mix in terms of the clients that we're working with. Going to quite an important thing that Pavel has raised, we are facing quite a number of inquiries on SPACs. I think SPACs have finally reached our region as well. I'm currently working on one. So hopefully, we'll be able to share more news next time we speak. That is definitely coming in, and I think there would be, a healthy interest into it, because most of the SPACs that are happening around the world are either focused on Europe or focused on United States domestically. So there's not a SPAC that is focused, more on our region or emerging markets or opportunities that we see here. So I would welcome that development, and would welcome the London Stock Exchange, through the Lord Hill Review, promoting the SPACs on this side of the Atlantic.
Which side are you on right now? Are you in London or in Moscow?
I'm in Moscow,
Okay.
but by what I meant is not in the US, but London.
Yeah.
Because, we see the amount of SPACs that are happening in Amsterdam and in Frankfurt. So it would be good to see them in London as well, especially that, from the region and in terms of the investor base, London has always been the place which has been, built over the years, the familiarity with the businesses coming from our region. So it would be, a logical extension for the CIS SPACs to be listed in London. And there's also the SME business. And I think at Sova Capital, we've actually dedicated a lot of time into looking into SMEs, which has been overlooked for quite some time. We have developed special programs on helping the SME businesses that are already being listed in terms of increasing the investor profiles, helping them with the liquidity. We have actually launched a product similar to what you have on a premium listing, offering Russian clients corporate broking, which we think, is very good practice that is implemented by the London Stock Exchange. And, we've kind of took on your best practices and trying, to have them available to the clients here, regardless of whether they're listed in London or they're listed in Moscow, but bringing the LSE experience here. So I think we will see the SMEs business trying it as well. I think they do have a deserved chance. I think AIM is a fantastic platform at LSE that kind of showed that, you know, regardless of your size, there is an opportunity for all. You just have to choose the right venue for it. And I think, you know, we've looked at the SME, we've done AIM deals this year at Sova. So we are very comfortable advising clients on the SME side to consider AIM and may not necessarily, you know, the main market as the opportunity for listing. So healthy mix, you know, different size, as I said, from SPAC to the SMEs, and to hopefully unicorns, you know, more fixed price deals to come.
Okay, fantastic. That sounds really great. So I think I'll switch to the Q&A then. Again, I'm inviting all of us, all of the audience, everyone who is listening to this right now, please think of questions and submit them through the chat box that you can see on the right side of the screen. And we already have a couple of questions, and I think they are, I'll read them out, and then, you know, please do volunteer, whoever wants to answer them. So have the recently changed listing rules changed the way a company should approach its IPO PR strategy? What is the most important time to engage with media? Is it the ITF day? No, I think it should be earlier, but I'll let someone, probably Emily, to comment. What about having to deal with unconnected analysts, meaning probably unconnected research analysts? Do they need a special PR approach? So who wants to start?
Well, just to kick off, I think the message that we were giving with Anton earlier on, it still stands about planning a very cautious media approach well in advance, so that there's an education program, so that the relevant media know the business as a hopefully a best in class in its sector, irrelevant whether it's listed or not, so that when the listing happens, they understand the business. So I think we would take a similar approach.
Yeah. Dmitry, anything?
Side, and probably that's more of the less of PR, more of the engagement with investors. Would definitely agree with what was said, that the engagement needs to start early. I mean, it was I think Anton mentioned that it was the fourth attempt, right, for them to do the which was successful to do the deal. I think we can do probably this. I mean, and that probably was preceded also by a lot of investor engagement even before that. I think that's very common that we see these days, with this market being on and off. I mean, another example we could use is Kaspi, for example, which was mentioned a couple of times, out of Kazakhstan, because that was a huge deal with a lot of success, but at the same time, it was preceded by enormous marketing, and you would engage with investors early. They know you, and then you pretty much use the ITF and the rest just to close the deals. That would be a bit of more backhand of the process rather than kind of the start of your communication.
I agree with that. Yeah. And I think with Kaspi, again, there were a couple of instances where the company came close to launching and then decided also to delay just because of the market conditions. And then you get ready, and then you just launch whenever you think the market will be receptive, right?
Exactly, and you never know when there is another COVID wave. I mean, the COVID was the reasons for one of the delay, or whether the market would kind of would not be, I mean, ready at that particular moment. At the same time, yes, the investors need to be aware of your company. The business is great. It's great also tool to show the progress that you make over the years, because when you meet investors, companies they mention the plans. So they tell the direction, and then it's great to come in a year's time and show how they have delivered or over-delivered, and that's always the reason for the success.
I think one of the things that we mentioned briefly earlier on, is this thing about purpose and business strategy and business purpose being relevant. And I think that's something you can showcase well ahead of any transaction, that you need to get a sort of thematic piece out about why this business is relevant to a certain trend, relevant to a changing industry, which is fit for the future kind of thing. And that actually sets it up really well for those investor conversations later on, but is completely independent.
Yeah. And then just a follow-up question: what are your recommendations for a PR strategy for a CIS SPAC listing? is it the same as normal, meaning probably the same as a sort of plain vanilla company structure? So I think, do SPACs need to be promoted?
I can take this question.
Yes.
I
Given this,
think the difference is it a question about SPAC or de-SPAC, right? But Alina, I will let you.
if we're talking about the SPAC listing, the first stage of SPACing, I think there will be differences in the PR strategy because SPAC is a shell. So there is no business to promote, physically as an existence. So your PR strategy at the time, I think, will be built around the personality of the sponsor that will be leading the SPAC. So if any activity is to be done, it would be done in the individual itself or the respective team members. So the object of your publicity will change from the company to the individual. But in terms of, raising the profile, in terms of timing, in terms of, building that noise around it, the positive noise around it, the awareness, the credibility of a personality will be the same as you do with the company, you do with the individual. It's just the object of your attention will be, a different matter. I don't know, Emily or Pavel.
I agree with that. For me, the PR and the marketing around these SPACs, is very similar to a REIT IPO, because in both cases you deal with a pool of cash going public, and as Alina said, there is not really an equity story. The focus is on the management, on the sponsor, and the terms of the SPAC. I think this changes once you move to the de-SPAC, because here you are dealing with a proper M&A transaction. But that's for me that is the.
Yeah.
Yep.
Great. A question from Matthew Edmond. Retail investors, increasingly important investor group. How do you engage, communicate effectively with this audience?
Retail investors, again, from a transaction perspective, indeed, and actually that's a very important question, because retail investors on the Russian deals have become the source of liquidity in the aftermarket performance. And it's becoming a group of people that is very important to consider and to manage expectations when you do a deal. The recent SPO that we've acted as a global coordinator on for Credit Bank of Moscow on the Moscow Stock Exchange, it wasn't London, it was Moscow, but retail took up almost 20% of the deal. So it's becoming quite significant numbers to consider. How do you deal with them? Again, in a similar type of way, in terms of, the PR strategy would be on a broader company the same, but with retail, you really do have to have a very specific, more simplified special sessions conducted with them. They do require a bit more simplified materials than the institutional, but you bear more risk because it's retail and not qualified. So it has to be a very balanced mix in terms of simplifying information, but not losing the risk disclosure that you need to have to make people aware of before they make any investments, because we as banks will then have a different liability towards those people. And that will require a much lengthy conversation with them, because again, retail takes time to make decisions. So if you do have a retail component in the IPO, you need to build this into your time frame, because they're not going to make decisions as quickly as institutional investors do. And they do need time, A, to think about it, and two, they may not necessarily have the cash on balance to invest in your transaction, and they need to build in time in order to sell a position that they have, free up the cash, and then use it for the investment in your deal. So special attention is definitely warranted, and I'm sure Dmitry can share from the deals that he's done.
Well, I fully agree with that. We saw very significant retail demand for when both Ozon and Sigage IPOs that we as RenCap were involved in. They definitely requires, fully agree with that, in additional communication, additional materials, kind of easier, punchier, and that's and obviously a lot of communication with you have to deal with the different kind of retail brokers, maybe using, people dependent on the real on what the legal kind of ways are possible, but you may consider using some Telegram channels and stuff like that, because that's becoming increasingly popular with retail. That's the way to get them, and that's very important for say Russian deal, for institutions to know that there will be retail that will be trading the deal, because I mean the liquidity and all the names. It's really picked up over the last year, right? It's the COVID phenomenon, and that's very important for everyone, for the institutions to know as well.
I was just going to echo what Dmitry was saying, because there's a huge ecosystem now growing with retail investors in Moscow, and multiple different channels and platforms that you can now use to access them, whether it's Clubhouse or video or even YouTube. But I think companies need to understand as well how to position their message on their websites and in their materials to retail investors who have less specific knowledge and less access to sort of analyst research and things.
Great point, guys. And what I'd add to that is we, the London Stock Exchange, totally value retail investors. It's the fair thing to do, but as a former banker and seeing the struggles that mid-cap companies had getting liquidity, it's really retail shareholders who are trading these shares day in, day out, setting prices. And we've invested in a fintech business called Primary Bid that have participated in a few IPOs like Parsley Box and Pension Bee, where they allow retail shareholders to invest at the point of IPO. From a bank's perspective, it just makes the process easier, because when you're building the book, you're not dealing with 300 retail shareholders. You're dealing with Primary Bid, who's representing those retail shareholders, and streamlining some of the legal processes associated with that. So for any issuer thinking about how to access retail, I'd encourage you to speak to a platform like Primary Bid.
Yes, Neil, and I find that what they've done, the USP of Primary Bid is that they've really simplified the process. You no longer need to go through a long, painstaking progress. You literally just open up an app and just press the button, right? Well, I'm probably generalizing, but I think it's just for retail investors to participate in IPO has become just much more streamlined. So I would definitely second that. Do we have any more questions? No, I don't think we do have any more questions. So I just maybe we actually have just 5 minutes left. I just want to ask this panel to give me maybe 20-30 seconds of your final thoughts about what messages would you give to Russian companies preparing to list in the next year or two, and also to the community of advisors and stakeholders that are supporting that process. Starting with you, Pavel.
Sure. From my perspective, just looking at the execution, my advice is very simple. Prepare. Start as early as possible. Do not delay the process. There will be a lot going on during the entire journey. It is a very important journey. It's a life-changing experience in the history of your corporate. So prepare, and that will pay off. That's my advice.
Alina?
I guess from my standpoint, it would be the IPO is not the end, is the beginning. And the most interesting part actually happens afterwards. Always have a bank or a banker that you trust to get you through this journey, because the market changes, situations happen, and I think Anton was describing how it took years in order to get there. Monitor the windows, because you never know when that fortachka will open up. So following on Pavel, you need to be prepared, and then you monitor. Don't leave PR until the end, as Emily said. You need to build your public profile from the very beginning. You don't do this in ITF, it's too late. And then choose your exchange very careful, because that's going to be your home base. So
thank you, Alina, for putting me out there.
So that would be my.
Okay, and I really need to. I can't remember. Is there a word for fortachka in English? Like a small window, a tiny little window.
We'll have to look it up. There must be one because I mean, if you look in the Windows junction,
Aperture?
Yeah, not sure. Like a
Do my
spotlight
best.
window, very small one. Yeah. Dmitry.
Little window.
Window clicker.
Well, I think I will echo what Michael and Elin said. I think the very short summary from our side will be: please get ready, be thoughtful about the process. Don't kind of think don't think it's a slam dunk, even if you're a great equity story. And choose advice and the venue extremely carefully. I fully agree with that, Alina.
Alina? Oh, sorry, Emily?
Oh, I think it's pretty much been covered up by everybody, but I suppose one message would be future looking. The message that's right for you today that's going to take you through the IPO needs to be relevant for the future because everybody's looking to the future now.
Yes. And Neil, to round off.
Sure. Two things from me. One, keep an open mind. It's very easy to follow others and apply conformity, but there's nothing wrong with being a pioneer. You can't speak to enough people, and we at London Stock Exchange would love to meet more Russian businesses. 700 of our 2,000 companies are international businesses, and I think we can provide a great home for you. And fundamentally, what's going to drive the value of your business? It's going to be execution, right? And it's really about managing expectations. And I can't say enough, but as long as you under promise and deliver, that will serve you well.
Thank you very much, Neil, and thank you to Richard Barlow, who says Fortachka can be translated as fanlight. I think it's very close. Thank you, Richard. And thank you to this fantastic panel. Thank you very much to the British Embassy, the DAT, the Ambassador Deborah Bronnet for helping us to put this conference together. We will send out post-event a communication and also an access to the recording of this event. Thank you all, and goodbye. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Pleasure
Thank
seeing
you,
you.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.